All right, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, we're here with Kandise Varvil. Is it Varvil or Varvil?
It's Varvil.
Varvil.
It's very complicated.
That sounds sophisticated to me.
Yes,
French
I think it's my husband's. I inherited it through marriage, so
still counts. You can take some French heritage there, I think,
yeah.
something like that. All right, well, Candace, excited to be with you today. We're gonna have some fun and talk about problems. Um, yeah, business problems. You down?
I love talking about business problems, Ben.
Let's
And we're going to talk
let's do
about
it.
some big problems,
Some
some
big
big,
problems.
big
Yeah.
business problems.
So I'm curious, from your perspective, what are the top business problems that property managers have to deal with?
Well, I mean, there's the obvious ones like people not paying rent and bad owners saying no to repairs that are required. And there's those ones. But when we think about introspectively what is going to break a business, I think they're the hidden ones. They're the things that are slowly creaking up. They're the leaks in the floorboards, right?
Hmm.
And so those are the ones that are going to sink the ship. Those are process problems. Those are teams that are not buying into what we're trying to implement. And those are the ones that I think, I'm assuming here, and correct me if I'm wrong, Ben, those are the ones that I've seen within our business break the company, right? They start from the ground up. So I'm curious, what are the things that stand out to you?
Yeah. The way I think about it is there's two kinds of problems. There are people problems and there are system problems. And most of the problems are system problems. In fact, that was kind of the idea behind titling the session the way that we did, with 66% of the problems in the business are your fault as the business owner. Because when we think about the way that problems come to be, so often we fixate on the feeling, right? The symptom, rather than the actual problem. It's like, well, my team is mad at me, or they're not talking to each other, or a building burned down this last week, right? Whatever the thing is, there's always a background reason, right? The building burned down because maybe it wasn't up to fire code, or maybe someone left a cotton ball near an outlet. I don't know. Who knows what it is? But there's always like a background thing. Would you
Mm-hmm.
agree with that?
Oh, absolutely. And I think a lot of the times, I mean, of course, there's going to be unexpected issues that happen within a business. This often ties a lot closer to people problems and system problems, but you can still have a server that goes down and all of a sudden your task management software is not working. And that is a system problem you have no control over, or a team member that has to go out unexpectedly. And now everyone on board is trying to make sure everything's being completed the way it's supposed to. So yeah, there's always going to be the opportunity, but if we're thinking about the 80-20 rule, 80% of what's going to happen is going to be something that's avoidable or we
Hmm.
could have prepared for. Even with the
Yep.
task management software going out, you can have written systems or another way to look at what needs to be done. Even if it's a team member going out, you could have their role, or you could have a backup plan or a way for other people to track the work that needs to be done. So really, I think most problems can be avoided in one way or another, even if something unexpected happens.
Yeah, totally agree. And I want to give credit to Tony Klein here for a minute, because I'm going to share a quote that he shared with me a couple of weeks ago that I just really loved. And it's this: problems are either system, training, or performance based. And the company leadership owns 66% of that equation. So company leadership owns systems and training. Performance, right? That's an uncontrollable, as in, right? Yes, we can screen people, but that's ultimately something that's outside your control as a team leader.
Right.
But training and how well your systems work, that's 100% within the business leader's realm of control. And most of the time, that's where those problems surface at all.
Yep, I absolutely agree. And I'm curious your perspective. If we are trying to be proactive here and we want to potentially prevent problems before they become problems, what is your first intuition to a solution for us to be able to prevent problems before they occur within the business and now cause dire reactions?
Yeah, great question. Well, the first thing that comes to mind here is that we need to recognize that it's going to happen and
Mm-hmm.
be okay with that. I think a lot of people stay in this space of everything has to be perfect, which is totally fair. Like, I get that. I'm a perfectionist.
Mm-hmm.
So it's very easy to say, well, no, we're not going to allow issues. We're going to have 100% perfection 100% of the time. It's just not going to be okay. But the reality of life and business and everything is that it's not a perfect world, right? Bad things do happen. Mistakes are made. And so if we're not preparing for it and recognizing that it's going to happen, and we're kind of shooting ourselves in the foot.
Mm-hmm.
So that I think that's the what's like the 5 stages of grief, right? You have to go through the acceptance first.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I don't remember what the next one is, but
There's
got to
like
start with the
denial. We're not going to worry about like denial and stuff right
let's skip
now.
the denial. But the
Anger, yeah,
acceptance
acceptance is the important part here.
acceptance is the important part. Forget that. Okay, so we have to start with accepting the problem. But once we've accepted that it's going to happen, then I think it does move to what can I do to take care of this? What is the action that I can take here? And in my mind, that's a documentation, right? That's where we start thinking about, okay, this is going to happen. How am I going to deal with it when it does? Right? If I am going to have a house that's going to burn down because someone left a cotton ball next to an outlet, could happen. I should have a process for that, right? I should know ahead of time when I get that call, here's what I'm going to do, as opposed to panicking when it does happen. And you might still have good intentions and do some of the right things, but you're not doing so having thought through it. It's just a gut reaction,
Yep.
fix the thing.
Absolutely. And one thing that you and I have in common, and for anyone who is watching that isn't aware, we are both process people, right? So we look at businesses on a very process-based perspective. And where our goal here is to, okay, how do we make these processes work for a business? And when we think about these processes that we're discussing, these hypothetical, okay, we need a process in place or we need documentation in place. One thing that I've seen, and I think this is kind of the crux of us having this conversation, is what happens when someone doesn't have that process in
Mm-hmm.
place, but they're trying to fit it into a system that's meant to make their life easier. So, Ben, I want to hear, what's the worst? Tell me a case study. What have you seen where someone has tried to squeeze a broken process into a system thinking that will be the solution?
I got a lot of stories.
I had a feeling you would.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got a client who has a lot of doors under management. Um, a lot being 1,000 plus, and they came to me with a lot of excellent team members and no
Mm-hmm.
documented processes. And so they have what I like to call tribal knowledge. Each individual person on the team had their own very specific area of expertise where they were amazing, right? And the proof of that is in the door count, right? They made it to past 1,000 doors using
Huge.
spreadsheets, sticky notes, whiteboards, all of this, right? And it blew my mind.
Mm-hmm.
And I had to give them major props, like you guys made it. This is you're doing crazy things. But the thing that kept breaking is they kept acquiring new business. And what would happen is the business owner, who was a salesperson, would get pitted against the operations team. And so there was this constant at heads where there was no defined process for how that new business came in and how it was treated and who handled it. But also, there was no connection between the sales and growth of the company and the capacity of the team to handle it. So I don't know if this is exactly answering your question here, but I feel like this is a great illustration of how there was process, but it wasn't documented, it wasn't agreed upon, and the parties that were a part of the process really were working together in a very healthy way, and it was creating a ton of conflict.
Mm-hmm.
What about you? What have you observed?
Yep, I've experienced it. I've experienced even with companies I've worked with where I've been the salesperson closing doors, and I've been told you need to stop closing doors, or I'd call a PM and say you have a new owner coming on, and they'd roll their eyes and be like, oh, why do you have to do this to me? Do you hate me, right? And it's like, no, I just want I'm commission based. Come on, right? So I've experienced that. But whenever it comes to implementation, I would say some of the most painful that I've seen is when you have and the client I'm thinking of, very similar, quite a lot of doors. They were in the 2000 range. And we get on to build these processes, and every single property manager did things different. So we get on a call and we're like, okay, we are building you a task management software that your whole team's going to follow. Well, how's that going to work when every single person has a different order
Yeah.
of tasks, right? We're
Oh,
not
okay.
able to build a different stage for each manager. And that, I think, was one where we had to have a kind of a reckoning moment where we looked at, okay, business owner, we need you to come here, and now it's your decision on how we want these processes to run. But as I'm sure you can imagine, when you have a bunch of PMs who've been there 20 plus years, they were not happy their processes are changing. And that was, I mean, deep rooted inconsistency in the process that caused a lot of friction when we're looking at how are we going to implement something for when we need to hire the next five if
Hmm.
every single person's doing it differently.
Yeah, such a good example. And I feel like that plays into something that you and I probably think a lot about, and most people don't, which
Mm-hmm.
is being departmental versus being in pods or portfolio structure or all of this. And
Constantly.
what we've both just described is a portfolio business, which
Exactly.
I think I don't want to downplay this at all because I think portfolio businesses are an extremely viable method, but they're viable because we're relying on natural ability of the individuals who are running those portfolios.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with natural ability is that it's tied to one person, right? One person has the natural ability to know the properties, build the relationships, know what's going on in each particular unit, and keep track of when the inspections happen, and this and that and the other. And these things get isolated either in our brain or our laptops or our email inboxes and all these different places where it's siloed and there's no access. Um, but the whole idea of departmental, at least in my opinion, is we're making things accessible to more than one person. We're defining things in such a way that it's not just about one person's natural ability or natural talent or skill. Instead, we're saying, how can we actually make this scalable? How can we go beyond one person? How can we touch a lot more people's lives, not only in the service that we provide, but in the team who works in this business? I don't know. I'm just ranting, but
No,
what are your
I
thoughts?
I totally agree. And now I'm curious, when you think of departmental, is that a pod structure, or are you delineating that a departmental structure is separate to what a pod structure is, which is separate to what a portfolio structure is?
Yeah, good question. So I think that pods can exist within a departmental structure.
Mm-hmm.
I think you can kind of what would be classically known as a hybrid. I think that's completely viable. The main issue there is consistency.
Yes.
And so long as you have a team who's consistently following processes, then it's fine. Pods totally work, right? Um, and I think where I personally would prefer the departmental method is just tying things in a very neat bow. And this is just me being a little bit of an organizational freak here, where I want to kind of keep things not touching, related, passing over as need be, but in as much as is possible, having clearly defined barriers or outlines for each of the responsibilities. How do you think about that? Because you have an experience here that I don't, which is you've actively worked in a property management company, and I never
Yes.
have. So tell me about
Yes.
that from your experience.
So, whenever we think about property management companies, portfolio based, of course, is you have a portfolio head, typically your property manager. Sometimes it's someone else in the company. I do think when you look at portfolio based, that is how a lot of companies scale because the company owner but hires their first property manager and hires every other team member in reaction to paying the property manager's failing. That's normal. When you think about scalability, I'm a big fan actually of the pod structure rather than the departmental because you have the ability to duplicate roles
Hmm.
when needed. So you could have one property manager overseeing a portfolio of 200 doors with two potentially resident service coordinators and two maintenance coordinators. Then you're only duplicating the property manager when that capacity hits.
Oh, I like
So
that.
departmental, I don't dislike, but I do think departmental, we are now looking at a different relationship with an owner of a company, right?
Hmm.
Or not the owner of a property, where that property owner is now potentially going to have a little more frustrating of an experience because departments tend to be a little more disorganized when you're thinking of intaking information. So I've seen it a couple different ways, but I think it's ultimately going to rely on the company owner to determine what makes the most sense and what their team is. Portfolio is going to be, again, very reactionary, where when you look at pods, you're going to be able to hire lower cost positions earlier.
Hmm. Yeah, and I think that's a key point, right? There's not a, well, at least I would say there's not a right answer, right?
And there
Um,
isn't. It's so hard because there isn't a right answer.
it truly does come down to what are the outcomes that you want and what's
Yes,
the method that's going to get you there.
exactly.
And while I would look at a portfolio business and say, well, if it was my idea and my plan of, hey, I want to grow a big business and have 5,000 doors under management and go sit on the beach and just do whatever I want, then that's going to be a really hard business to scale in that model if it's not
Mm-hmm.
departmental, right? If I stay portfolio, then I'm really giving too much freedom, too much control to the variables that are necessary for me to control in order for me to scale. But if you say, hey, I want to be 150 doors and have 3 property managers and they all do everything related to their 50 doors that they manage, great, right? You can still have
Exactly.
consistency, and you can still define clear processes. I think it's just a little bit. It really does come down to what's the outcome that you want.
Exactly. And whenever we think about kind of the scalability and as we relate this all back to process and processes breaking, I think this is a question most management company owners need to consider when they think about scalability and building process is who is going to be filling those roles. And where I've seen a lot of breaks within process, and I'm really curious about your perspective on this, is we find breaks within processes because potentially they built a role for a person who wasn't meant to be in that role, or they built potentially a structure or a task management that was not built for the team that they've now created. I'm curious, how do you navigate that, and how have you noticed that maybe the issue with this process isn't the process per se, but the people they're assigning to the tasks?
That was a really tough question.
I'm so
Um,
sorry, Ben. It's just right off the dome.
no, this is the important stuff, and I think these are the kind of things that it's like the nitty gritty that doesn't get talked about enough. Um,
Mhm.
so, just recapping here, the question here is how do we handle processes when people are in the wrong seats? Is that a fair
Yes.
summary? Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. So, when you have people who are in the wrong seats, it's a tough scenario because you've already got them in your team, right? You've already made some commitment around this person's expecting to have a job, and they're
Yes.
expecting to have this job.
Yes.
um, so, I think there's a couple of things that one should do when you're in this scenario. Number one, setting clear expectations with your team. So,
Yes.
any type of engagement where you are working on this by yourself, or if you're bringing in an outside team to help you, it's important to set expectations with your team and say, hey guys, we are going through some fundamental change in how we manage this business. We're doing
Yes.
X, Y, and Z, and this is some of the outcomes that we're expecting. We know it's going to be uncomfortable. It's going to be a little shaky while we make some of these adjustments. Let's all stay on the same team, right?
Mhm.
And setting those clear expectations up front. After you've set those expectations, then I think the next important step is to involve the team in the process, right?
Mhm.
And when I say involve the team in the process, I mean a couple of things by that. Number one, you want to involve them in the documentation, right? So that you can help everybody to be on board with here's how things work. Here's your frontline team's actual view of here's how we handle the lease renewal versus what you think if you're not actually involved in it. Um, but that involvement is also in talking about roles and responsibilities because even as you're building processes, um, roles and responsibilities is a big part of the equation that we don't often talk about, right? Building scorecards and job descriptions is, I don't know if I want to say it's less glamorous, but somehow it does feel less glamorous than building
KPI. What do
process.
you mean KPIs? Like that is those are the diamonds of the property management
Oh
industry,
my
Ben.
goodness. Right? There's so much love lost, I think, in these opportunities to set standards because I think that's really what it comes down to. So again, bringing it back to your question here, I think getting your team to help you set standards around the way that things should work creates some really positive peer pressure. Now, I'm not saying your team should say, well, we're going to answer one email a day and that's an acceptable level of how we're going to do our jobs. Obviously not, right?
What if they're only
You still
getting
need,
one email a day, Ben?
well, we've got to be flexible here, right? We got to figure out exactly what it is. What is the job description? What is the realistic expectation? But I guess my point here is that the leader still needs to exercise leadership and say this is what we will tolerate, because what you tolerate is what you promote. So we want to make sure that there is a clear level of tolerance, but also I want to have my team involved in okay, what's realistic here? Because I may say, hey, I want you to make my sales guy, I want you to make 50 outbound calls every day. That's a cool goal, but can he actually pull it off and do
And
the other
what
things
else is
that
on his plate?
what else
And
is on his plate, right?
that's a
So
big conversation I think a lot of people overlook. And what one thing that, especially whenever I'm looking high level at a business, if more than one person is responsible for a task, nobody is. And I think that's really important when we're determining a process and we're determining if this is actually going to fit into the long-term growth plans for a company. But also, we need to know if, okay, if one person is clearly responsible for X, Y, and Z, it is so much easier to know if they're going to have capacity for other things and when that capacity will be hit. When we think about where processes break, oftentimes it's because someone hits capacity before someone else does. And so now we have clear attrition of tasks they're falling apart at this one stage. Now we have an easy place to fix. Phase two is, okay, if we have someone who isn't at capacity, what else can they take? If we want the salesperson to complete 50 outbound calls a day, fantastic, but are you expecting them to close 30 doors a month? Are you expecting them to do on-site visits to every single consultation? What's our close rate? Does that mean we have 100 leads coming in monthly that we're doing on-site visits for, and now you're still expecting these outbound calls? There is so much that affects one area of a process that you overlook when you're thinking of, oh, we have to do this because of urgency to stop the bleeding, because the business is having problems. And if we're always operating in a reactive capacity, what we're going to do is break our team. We are going to overload our team because we're not being proactive. We're not assigning tasks proactively. We are not making sure that we have a system built that is meant to be proactive and meant to keep the ship running smoothly. And I'm not sure if you relate to this in the builds that you've done and the processes you've looked at, but the times where I've realized I have to sometimes sit down a company owner and say, hey, we need to slow down. It's because they want to put too much on people who can't handle it, or because they haven't actually looked at what their team's capable of doing. And sometimes they have one team member they're underutilizing and five they're overutilizing, or vice versa, where we just need to spread these tasks out.
Yeah, change management is like a really big deal. And I think
Huge deal. The biggest deal, some might say.
when we're talking about like growing companies, I mean, yeah, you're right. It is the biggest deal, right? Change management is the life of the company. So you're going to go from, okay, here's my status quo. I've got, 100 doors that I'm self-managing. Then you bring in a new team member. And then later on, you're going to have to bring in another team member. And you're going to have to manage every bit of that change to make sure that your team knows exactly what to do and that all the responsibilities are clearly outlined and all of these things are easily documented and understood and all this. But the reality of the managing the change itself, not just the tools and the workflows and the documentation of the processes, that's a whole other thing. And it really is, I think, just to do a little self promotion here, promotion for you too. It's not just me, but I think this is the reason why services like ours are important for PMs, because you have a lot of other crap going on, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're already taking care of a very complex and multifaceted businesses. You have to deal with all the complexities of your corporate finances and then the finances of every single building that you're managing. Plus, you've got a team to manage. You've got all the complexities. It's just a lot, right? So again, not trying to be super self-promoting here, but I think this is a reason why services like ours are important. Ultimately, what we do in the process management space is what our clients do for their clients in the property
Exactly.
management space, right?
Yep.
They're taking an expensive asset and managing it in a way that helps that client to be more financially successful, to have more peace of mind, and to get positive outcomes in their business endeavor, which is investing in property. We do the same thing. We're just doing it in technology and systems and tools that make your business run more smoothly. So
Exactly.
it's honestly like it's almost a one-to-one comparison in my opinion.
No, it truly is. And even as we think about the process and process implementation, the way that we're communicating with our clients, it is really focused on their clients, right? So a lot of the focus that I have whenever I'm sitting down and like looking at a specific process with a client, it is, how are we going to make this a good experience for the person that you are working with your ideal customer? And that is where, again, when we see processes fall apart, or we see, and this is, we're not going to dive too much into tech today, but when we see people who are implementing new tech, almost always it's because it's meant to make their clients' life easier. But again, a lot of times if we don't have the process built for the tech, then we are now introducing something that's going to break our process and potentially make a more frustrating experience for their team. And I'm curious, Ben, when you're talking to someone who is saying, "Hey, I heard of this really great thing I want to implement within my business. I want your advice. Do I need it? Should I do it?" What, from a high level, what are you looking at within their business to determine if that is the right fit for them and if they actually do need that?
Oh gosh, again, ton of questions, Candace. Golly,
Heavy hitters
uh,
today.
no, I love it. So really the question here is, how do we evaluate ideas,
Yes.
right? How do we determine whether something is a good idea, whether we go to the left or to the right? I think, again, where I go is, what's the true north? What is the outcome that I want? Does going to the left get me closer to the outcome that I want? No, it doesn't. Okay. Do I need to go to the right? Actually, no. We just need to keep doing what we're doing, because these are both distractions and we just need to focus on the one thing. Or maybe this little deviation to the right gives me a slight uptick or a small exchange of value. So I think, yeah, you really do have to evaluate these on a case by case basis, but you must do so in the light of, what is my big goal? And this is one of the reasons I'm such a big fan of EOS, because it really pushes you as a business to clearly define, here's my 1, 3, 5, 10-year goals. And when you make all the decisions in the light of, okay, well, this is the 10-year goal, and everything else works backwards from that, you say, okay, well, should we hire this other person? Well, does it get us closer to our 10-year goal?
Absolutely.
Maybe.
And that,
Right.
I think it really ties to, again, as you mentioned, the true north, right? You need to know where it is we want to be, to know what we need to implement to get there. If we're implementing things because they're shiny or they're new or their title has AI somewhere in it, that may not always be in the best interest of the company. And that is, it's, if you don't know where you want to be and you don't have a visual of, this is where I expect my company to be, this is how many doors I want, this is what I want my team structure to look like, and I want to be in Cancun for 8 months out of the year, then you're not going to be able to build a company that is able to function the way you need it to achieve those goals. And I do see a lot of shiny object syndrome within the industry, where it's easy to say, oh, this thing, they just told me that it's going to help me and it's going to make my life easier, but it doesn't. Or now you have to get team buy-in, or maybe you have people that this is now changing their entire role. And now, again, we're back to change management. We're back to having to take this really slow and potentially break some of our processes to fit it in. And there's so many things we have to navigate when determining, okay, is this what I need to be able to continue moving forward? And how am I going to implement this? I think that all ties back to leadership. I think that all ties back to leaders understanding what the goals are for their company, and then being able to plot this plan that they're then able to implement.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. Okay, well, let's use our last couple minutes just for some questions here. So we got a question here in the chat from Kennedy. What are tips for navigating? Hey, Kennedy, good to see you. What are your tips for navigating these process implementations when you have a small staff and everyone is still doing their day job? Ooh, Candice, all you.
I love this question. And hi, Kennedy. So, whenever we're thinking about teams, I think that we're looking at capacity, right? So, capacity is, of course, going to change whenever you have people running their day jobs, because they're going to have less capacity to do things within the business. I think this changes the way we're structuring our company very little. What's important whenever we have a smaller team, and Ben, I'm really curious to hear if you feel like this aligns with you, or if you have a totally different opinion. And I think it'll be awesome if you have a totally different opinion. But whenever I look at a company that has a smaller team, I like for us to clearly define roles within that. And that means we probably have an owner who is also a BDM, who's also a property manager. And we are assigning tasks in their task management for those three roles. And we are then assigning the person to those three roles. The reason I do this is because you're not going to be a small company forever. You are not going to have your team working full-time jobs forever. So we are building a structure meant for a larger team that has the capacity for 500 doors, but we're doing that in a way that isn't affecting our day-to-day right now. We can assign all of these tasks to one person, and then we're breaking them out as the team grows and as we hire new people. Ben, what is your opinion?
Okay, so not going to disagree with that. I think that's the right approach. But I want to take Kennedy's question a slightly different direction. I think what she's asking here is more of, how do you actually do the implementation? Like, how do you actually make it happen when you're already working a full-time job and you only have a couple team members and you don't have someone to like hand off everything to, which is a really tough question and super important. So here's what I would suggest, Kennedy. Number one, acknowledge the problem. Like we talked about earlier, right? This is kind of a scenario where you have to say, okay, this is going to suck and we are going to get through it, right? And you need to do the type of documentation that Candice just said. Write down the rules, define who is going to be in this seat at a 500 person or a 500 door company, all this. But I think it really does come down to saying, okay, I'm going to quote unquote embrace the suck. We'll drop a link there and say, this is not going to be fun for this period of time that I'm giving myself. And you may say, all right, for the next 6 weeks or 6 months, or hopefully not 6 years, but whatever it is, I'm going to work the weekend and work on this project specifically. I will not allow anything else to distract me. This is what I am doing. And I'm not going to say that that's fun or pretty, but I think it's a decision that you have to make in order for you to get forward. And ultimately, it is the investment that any business owner has to make in order for you to get to the next level of growth. Because without the investment, it doesn't happen.
And I do think it's really important to navigate with intentionality and think about, okay, what needs to be done right now, again, and especially for small business owners, and when we're in these first couple months and years of our business, there's a level of, there's always going to be urgent things that have to happen right now. So it is being intentional. So I'm going to handle the urgent things because that must be done, but that's not going to stop me from prioritizing the things that are going to help build the foundation for growth. And that can be hard, but it does take sometimes just literally writing it down. Write down the top 5 things you're going to accomplish in the next couple of months that's going to keep us moving forward. That isn't a maintenance request we just received or a fire we have to put out. These are things that are moving us forward. And that, I think, it's slow, it's intentional, it's not always shiny, but it's what's going to keep us moving forward.
Yep. All right. Well, we have to wrap it up here. Speaking of urgent things, I've got to go jump on another call, but we're going to do this again, Candace, because this was super fun.
We're going to talk about pods and portfolios next time, Ben. I'm ready for that
Let's do it.
conversation.
Let's do it. All right. See you, everybody. Have an awesome
Thank
day.
you for coming. Bye.